Hey, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to our session about managing AVD the modern way. Hey, Sander,
Hey, good morning, Stefan. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you very much.
All right, that's good to hear.
So, welcome in our session for our session. We would like, before we start, we would like to thank the organizers of the Festive Tech Calendar for letting us do our session. I'm really excited to do it like this. And in this session, uh, we are going to talk about managing AVD the modern way. We changed the session a little bit because first we wanted to mainly focus on the managing part, but we decided so there are a lot of sessions and content about managing physical devices with things like Microsoft Endpoint Manager, Intune, and the same principles, the same mechanisms will be applying to physical devices. So Sander and I decided to do this session more about enrolling a AVD session host into Intune. We are going to talk about the hybrid part, native Azure AD Join. We have some demos, and we also have a demo about the new preview of Microsoft Average Logic for Azure AD Joint devices. But more on that later. Um, well, I think we are ready. So let's start.
Yep, let's get started.
Cool.
All right. Well, let's do some introduction about myself. Well, I'm Sander Rozemuller from the Netherlands, from a very small town in the east of the Netherlands. Um, I'm 37 years old, young, and well, I'm at the moment a cloud developer at Unica ICT Solutions with a main focus on automation, working with PowerShell, DevOps, Terraform, all that kind of stuff. Um, well, I'm also a co-leader of the Dutch Virtual Desktop User Group. We changed our name for a few weeks ago. And also, I'm one of the leaders of the AVD global community. Um, well, at last, I became a Microsoft MVP in the enterprise mobility category past September. So I'm very glad with that. And I'm really excited about this presentation, about all the new stuff Microsoft announced, and we would like to show what's new in there. I'm also a blogger, and I'm writing a lot of blogs about automation. You can find the blogs on rozemuller.com. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and you can also reach me with email. So, well, that's about me.
Cool. So my name is Stefan Dingemanse. I'm 32 years old, young. I live in the Netherlands. At this moment, I'm a consultant at Firma ICT, and I mainly focus on application and desktop delivery on the Azure cloud. I'm an Microsoft MVP, just like Sander. Um, and I'm also the co-founder of the AVD community and the Dutch Virtual Desktop user group. And well, kind of hot off the press. Yesterday, I also received my Microsoft certified trainer uh, welcome email. So from now I know I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer. So that's pretty cool. If you want to contact me, uh, you will see the website. Follow me on Twitter or just drop me an email, and I will definitely reply to you. So let's get started with our session. Um, like I said, we created this course for a like more of a learning goal about Azure Virtual Desktop and Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So for this course, for this presentation, this session, what you will learn is how to enroll your session host into Intune and perform like a hybrid domain join or a native domain join. Uh, and I think that's it. The agenda for today. So Sander will be talking about, okay, so what is Azure Virtual Desktop? For everybody who don't know what it is, we will do a quick recap on what it is. Then I will be talking about the hybrid part. We are not going to discuss why you should be using hybrid or why you should be using native. The reason for that is there are a lot of options and there's a lot of reasons why customers and companies need to choose like the hybrid scenario. And there are also a few reasons why they can choose the native Azure AD Join. Um, so we're going to talk about the hybrid part, the native Azure AD Join. We will show you how to deploy it via the Azure portal or how you can use some automation via PowerShell to enroll your session host into to the Azure AD and into Intune. I will show you how you can access on-prem resources with just a native Azure AD joined machine. It's quite easy, to be honest. You don't have to do anything to configure it, so that's a cool thing. Sander will be talking about the new FS Logic profiles for the Azure AD joint virtual machines, unless we will touch a little bit of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. But like I said, we're going to focus on those other things. We'll have some device filters, how you can create them and how you can use them.
Okay, great. Yeah, let's start with a little bit a recap about what Azure Virtual Desktop really is. Well, besides it's very cool, of course, it's a full desktop virtualization thing in the public cloud. We're all working with on-prem desktops with Citrix or other vendors and providing full desktops and applications in our private cloud environment. And Azure Virtual Desktop is almost the same, only it's in the public cloud, of course, and really nice, it is for the half of the environment managed by Microsoft itself. We have two different types of session hosts. We have a single session host and a multi-session host, and it depends on the host how many users are able to log in on that host. Well, as the name says, a multi-session host is available for multi-users. You can configure the max limit of the max user count on one machine. And a single session host is just like a VDI in Citrix. It's reserved for one single user, and it can use the whole machine for itself. Well, you can also use images for enrolling those session hosts. There are a lot of topics around the internet about how to deal with image management. Microsoft also has its own images which you can use. So it's very scalable and very high customizable what you like to do. There's also an option to not use the full desktop and only stream applications. In that case, you will see applications as a button into a remote desktop client or in a web browser. You can click on them and then only the application will show up in your desktop. As I said, a big part of that environment is managed by Microsoft itself. So as you can see, there are no gateway servers like a session host broker, a front-end server, and that kind of machines which are needed, of course, still also in Azure Virtual Desktop to let people in. There are also no brokers which you have to manage. Microsoft is all doing that for you. The only thing we need to do as modern IT people is make sure your image is good, is ready, the apps are correctly installed, and the session hosts are available in a session host pool. Yes, there also are some requirements beside the licensing thing, which is not my cup of tea. So I will skip that part for now. You also have to create a Windows image. As I said, you can create your own image. You can use a Microsoft one. So I think that's not the hardest part for now. And of course, you need a machine which is domain joined. Yes, the slide deck also says it must be Azure Directory joined, but of course now it's also possible to have an Azure AD joined machine. So that's exactly the part which we are going to discuss in this session, the difference between an Azure AD and a Active Directory joined machine environment. So Stefan, please tell us about something about the hybrid AD join.
Yeah, the hybrid Azure AD Join. Okay, so hybrid Azure AD Join. What it is? Well, in my opinion, it's the best of both worlds. So you're, in this case, our session host, so the virtual machine where our users will get the user session is being uh, uh, domain joined to our on-prem Active Directory, and with on-prem, it doesn't, of course, need to be on-prem. It can also be like a domain controller running in Azure, but it's our traditional Active Directory domain services. Right after the session house will be domain joined, there's a configuration being applied, which will make sure that that same session host will also be Azure AD joined. So that one machine is being connected to the Active Directory. So you've got your authentication stack, everything you need for your on-prem environment, but you also get your single sign-on experience with all your cloud apps based on Microsoft 365 and the Azure Active Directory. So what do we need to get this stuff working? Well, you need to make sure that if you are running an on-prem Active Directory, that you are going to synchronize your users and your computers to the Azure AD. So you have to get Azure AD Connect implemented. And of course, because we're going to sync the computer objects, you have to make sure that that organizational unit will be synced to the Azure AD. You will have a domain controller with at least version 2008 or 2. You can only synchronize a single forest. And one big thing, your golden image should not already be Azure AD joined. If that's the case, you can use this little command dsrec cmd, in this case /debug/leave. So your golden image is not Azure AD joined. You can use the same command to check the status of different images to see if it's part of a domain, a Azure AD domain. But more on that later. Well, how can you test your session host, or how can you perform like a small proof of concept or a testing environment to set this up? There are a few ways to do this. Most of the times, if it's like a company-wide configuration, you can use AAD Connect. During the AAD Connect configuration wizard, you will have an option to like create an SCP, and the SCP is the part where the devices will look to see what kind of which tenant they belong to. If you don't want to test this like across your complete organization, you can also configure it via the registry. You have to make sure that there is a tenant ID and a tenant name, and then that machines will use that information when they perform a Azure AD join. Um, Make sure that if you do going to test it like this, that you also clean up that SCP from Azure Edit, so you're not showing that information to your devices. Um, how can you configure hybrid Azure AD join? Well, like I just said, there are two options. You can use the SCP configuration, that is the Azure AD Connect wizard will help you configuring this. You can also use the PowerShell scripts, which will being shown in this wizard. So if you didn't set this up before, well, it's quite easy. You will just have to open the Azure AD Connect wizard, go to the Configure Device options, and select Configure Hybrid Azure AD Join. You have some information about hybrid Azure AD joins, and you can select which kind of devices you want to make sure hybrid Azure AD join is working. So in this case, I think in most of the cases we will be using Windows 10 or later, so Windows 10, Windows 11. Well, there's a part where you have to authenticate against the Azure Active Directory um, to create the service connection point. And in the same part, you can also download the PowerShell script. Most of the times, you can use that if does not have if your user account does not have the correct permissions. If there is another team in your organization who apply changes like this, you can leverage the configure SCP PowerShell script and let them configure it. Well, and at the end, it will be configured via the wizard. Um, well, right after you configure this, what happens next? So in this case, we have a session house. It's being domain joined. It's living in an organizational unit. It has a computer account, but isn't Azure AD joined already. So what will happen in the next few minutes? So the computer object will be synced to Azure AD at the next sync. And default, this is like 30 minutes. So after 30 minutes, that computer object is being synced to Azure AD. That same session host will also receive a GPO to join the Azure AD. It can be that it's connected to the SCP, but it's also the case that it is configured via the registry. So you will pick that up, and right after that, a scheduled task will be created, and that scheduled task will run the process to perform the join, and eventually the device will appear in your Azure Active Directory. In the portal, so right on the devices, you will see the join type as a hybrid Azure AD joined device because it's AD joined, and in this case also Azure AD joined. You will see the status of this device as pending with the date and time. It will take a few seconds, sometimes minutes, to show up correctly. But that's not it. So now we got our session house being like hybrid domain joined. So it's being joined to the Azure AD domain and it's being joined to the on-prem domain. But we also want to make sure that the device is automatically enrolled into Intune because in this scenario we want to use our traditional GPOs, but we also leverage like the Microsoft Endpoint Manager, Intune to configure and to manage those devices. So how does that work? There are a few requirements to perform the automatic enrollment into Intune. The session node must be joined to the on-prem domain and the Azure domain. You have to configure the mobile device management service within Azure, otherwise it will not work. For the configuration, make sure you have at least the latest administrative templates, because in earlier versions you will not see all the correct options. The Azure Virtual Desktop agents needs to have a certain version or later, and there are a few scenarios supported. It's Windows 10, and it's also supported on Windows 11, single session and multi-session. So what are we talking about? When we want to automatically enroll that device in Intune, you have to enable this GPO. Enable automatic MDM enrollment using default Azure AD credentials. There are a few options. You can choose device credentials and user credentials. We test this a lot, and you have to make sure that you're using the device credentials. Why do we need the device credentials? Otherwise, if you use the user credentials, that machine will be joined or enrolled to Intune once a user logs in. But we want to enroll that machine before the user logs into that machine. Otherwise, well, the user will get a AVD desktop not configured, no policies being applied, and it will take some time before the enrolling complete. And then you have to make sure that the configuration has been applied. So it's way better to use the device credentials to enroll that machine into Intune. If you configure this policy, well, of course, the policy will be applied. So the session host will receive the GPO. Right after that, also a scheduled task is being created, and eventually you will see a event ID of 75, which means a successful MDM enrollment. And you can also see that it's being used the device credentials. And then it's time to wait. Sometimes it's like 30 seconds, but there are also cases where it can take up a few minutes before that device is being shown up in Microsoft Endpoint Manager. But the result is a hybrid AVD session host, which is being connected to the on-prem domain, which is being connected to the Azure AD domain, and which is automatically being deployed or enrolled into Intune. And I think Sander will discuss the next part, because we showed you just the hybrid part, and I'm a big fan of the hybrid part because, well, in my opinion, it's the best of both worlds. You can easily get your like traditional legacy stuff migrated to like cloud only, Intune, all that kind of things. But there are companies, there are customers which don't have like all those legacy applications and can use AVD with just Azure AD Join. And Sander will show you how that's going to work.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. Yeah, well, the Azure AD Join part is, as Stefan mentioned, it's a full cloud, a public cloud solution. What I'm going to show you in this part is how to configure a Azure AD Join session host with the portal and also through PowerShell. When configuring a session host with the portal, I will show it in the demo within a few minutes. what happens over there is when you create a session host, you can select which type of join you like, Azure AD or native AD or Active Directory. And well, what happens under the hood is the correct extensions are installed on the virtual machine. If you have only a virtual machine, so not a session host, not an AVD environment or so, then so you want to create just a single VM, then you have to install the correct extension after the VM is deployed, and that's a big difference in relation to AVD. I will show it in a little demo. So I'm trying to share my screen over now.
And I think I need to do also some clicking. Let me check.
Lovely working remote.
Yeah, but it is working. So we are seeing your screen somewhere.
That's fine.
Oh,
All right, cool.
that's fine.
Cool. Well, it's I can tell the best about with showing something instead of just number or just reading a slide deck. For you. So let's start with Azure Virtual Desktop host pool. In this case, we have three. But for our demos session, we have created two host pools. The one without the AD joint, that's the Azure AD joint. The other one is AD joint host pool. Good to know is you can only have one type of domain joint machines in a host pool. So that's what I mean is. For now, I only have one session host, but if I want to have more session host pool, then all these session hosts must join in the same way. So I can't mix two domain joint machines into one host pool. There are several reasons for that. What is happening? The main reason why this can be mixed up is about the host pool properties. There is an advanced option, and within the RDP properties, the target is Azure AD joins. When setting this configuration, the host pool what is doing. Connect to this host pool knows, alright, I look at the Azure AD and not on the Active Directory. Other machines, you won't be able to log in on that machine. So that's a big difference. That's a big difference between those host pools. Okay, well, what about the session hosts? Before I create one, I first need to create a registry key. So as you can see, what I need to do is create one. And this is a registry key is a key. As you can see, it's very long. Which is used as a global representation of host pool. So I'm creating a new session host. I provide this session host gets Azure Virtual Desktop configuration part, and to install. He's looking for the cloud, which is representing this token. That's the way how they match a session host to a host pool. Well, I'm creating a session host. So as you can see, first I have the basic thing. Change anything about it because I'm already in host pool. First now is I have to create virtual machines. A lot is filled in already. So that's not the part where I'm concerned about. I will scroll down a bit, down, and then over here I have the domain part where I can decide if it's Active Directory or Active Directory. If I select Active Directory, of course I have to provide a user which domain is admin, of course, because they have to join the machines. I have to provide password also. Well, it's not. Well, it's not. Default is no specified domain or unit.
Specified domain or unit.
I must say I'm always profiling this one because I have seen a lot of errors joining in a OU, which by default is the computer's OU. I've seen a lot of errors about. I've seen a lot of errors about join that kind of stuff. So I always create a OU first, not the default first, not the default. That's the OU I provide over here. That's the OU I provide over here. Also, I provide the domain to join, and that's it. That's the Active Directory part. That's the Active Directory part. If I choose for Azure Active Directory, then the only option I have is enroll PM with Intune, yes or no. I must say, I choose always yes because then you are able to manage those machines Intune with Intune. The part below is the username and the password for the VM itself. The VM itself, so that's not very hard. That's not very hard. So that's the main difference. That's the difference between Azure Active Directory and Active Directory from a AVD perspective. When you are creating just a single VM, which a session is actually, and I create here a virtual machine. Then you probably know you don't have any option join a Active Directory or so. Active Directory part you have to do later on. Well, and how are you going to do that? How are you going to do that? That's also what. If you look underwater, I have seen a lot writing my automation parts that I'm triggered about what is happening underwater. So reverse engineering ARM templates, from each other, and so trying to figure it out exactly. It's happening exactly. Click OK. What is happening? When from deploying virtual machine as a session host from the Azure virtual desktop plate, when you look into the ARM templates, you will see it's also installing extensions. So the portal is just providing an option to add those extensions by the Azure of the Active Directory part. Actually, I'm now on an Active Directory VM, and I'm looking to its extensions. And as you can see, it has an extension. It has an extension type with JSON AD domain extension. Deep dive into what this extension actually does. The main thing what I like to show now is type of this extension. Version not important from now. Very important from now. And those extensions have different values. So when I'm looking underwater into this extension, then I have to provide a username, I have to provide a domain with that kind of stuff. Well, I'm looking now to the Azure AD joint virtual machine. There, as you can see, I will click on it. It's a whole different type of a Active Directory extension. So I can show something about this extension in my Visual Studio Code. I hope you can see it. Stefan, our view.
We can see it.
All right. Cool. Then the only thing what I need to provide underwater to join a VM to automate Azure AD is the extension, of course. This is the publisher. Extension type AD login for Windows. I will give it a name. So it's not the hardest part. The biggest differences between those extensions, besides the name and publisher, of course, the settings part. It's the settings part. What I do in the Active Directory and the Azure AD part is I'm providing a setting MDM with ID and that's ID, and that's what I've seen is always the same.
What I've seen is always the same. So
I don't know what ID exactly does for now. But by profiling this setting, also join this machine into Intune. And when I skip this part, so I'm just not profiling it, so I'm just not profiling it, then it will not join Intune. So that's the part about Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. That's not the good one. Well, later on. The good one. Later on. So there's a big difference. Between the Active Directory and Azure joint machines. AD joint machines show up. Well, I can show up what is happening under devices. Stephen mentioned before. Looking to these devices, then you can also see what type of device it is. As Stephen mentioned, when you have hybrid, then it's a machine from a local AD, synchronized to Azure AD. If I have a machine directly joined to Azure AD, then you will see this. That's the part where you can see the difference. That's the part where you can see the difference, of course, beside the extension. But normally you're not looking at extensions when looking at this is the place where manage those devices. Well, that's a little demo about Azure AD versus hybrid AD join part. I'm looking to my slide deck. If I missed something, well, Stefan, can you take your screen back, please?
Yeah, I have.
Then I have a little slide about the differences between Azure AD joins versus hybrid AD joins in combination with Azure Virtual Desktop, because there is a little difference between them. Because as you maybe probably know, is when you're deploying a session host, it also installs several agents on an VM to join the session host. As I mentioned, you create a token. The token is representing the host pool on the public internet, so the session host knows where to connect to. The whole AVD configuration is also an extension, and that's a desired state configuration extension. So what happens on the water? It's installing it's running a PowerShell, it's setting registry keys, it's downloading software, it's downloading remote desktop agents, that kind of software. And there is a difference between those two environments, because when you install a hybrid AD joint, then it's a machine, then the desired state config is also slightly different, because it does not have the AAD joint setting in its extension. And it sounds a bit weird what I say maybe, but there is a difference. Microsoft has configured two different types of desired state configurations. It's doing the same, of course, but the hybrid AD join type has several settings not available, which the Azure AD join extension has. And when I was trying to install an extension with Azure AD, I got a lot of errors underwater because it's not accepting different settings which I needed to get Azure AD joint machines. The biggest difference is the AAD join setting. As you can see in the big screenshot with the code, then you can see the host pool name. Then you can see the registration token. Well, that's on both sides the same. So if I hybrid or not hybrid, those two settings you always have to provide. The only thing is the AAD join setting, which is true for now. and I haven't seen yet that Microsoft is using the same package where you can see AAD join true or false. So for now, I'm deploying two different types. I've posted an URL on the slide deck. This is the URL which is needed to install AAD join machines in combination with Azure Virtual Desktop. And normally you won't get this zip file, so I had to do a lot of research to get this one. And that's the thing I provide as a model URL. As you can see in as you can see in the big screenshot, I'm providing a modules URL. This is the URL of this package. So if you want to install this one of the Azure AD joint extension, then you have to provide this URL. So that's the automation part. I also wrote a blog about how to join Azure AD machines in combination with Azure Virtual Desktop. And I have explained exactly also this point with all the errors I got. So it's a bit too deep for now to explain exactly what is happening, but I will say read my blog about this, and you can you have all the screenshots, code, and everything you need to get it working. So that's the part about Azure AD versus well, not versus, but the difference between Azure AD and hybrid.
Yep. And how to configure it.
Yep.
And at the end, especially with the automation part, of course, it's way easier than the hybrid setup. Cool. Okay, so on to the next part. We are still using the Azure AD joint AVD session hosts. So we are not going to use those hybrid machines anymore. We just want to use the Azure AD joint AVD session hosts. And most of the times what I hear is, well, how can you then access your on-prem resources like your file share? That's quite easy. So for this to work, you have to synchronize your Active Directory, your users, to the Azure AD. So you have to make sure that your devices, so in this case our AVD session hosts, have a line of sight so they can contact a domain controller, and otherwise and also of course your file server or other things. So if those are not connected to the same network, you can use things like a VPN connection to connect those devices to the same network as your domain controller or your file services. So for this demo, and in this case, it's living in my hub spoke network. So those machines will have a line of sight to the domain controller, and in this case, the file share is also on the domain controller. But how does it work? So if you join your device to Azure AD, your users already have a single sign-on experience. So they can use single sign-on to access their cloud applications in their environment. If you have the native Active Directory join, you don't have that. So that's the reason why you can use the Azure AD join, because you will have a single sign-on experience throughout your complete environment. If you have a hybrid environment with like both Azure AD and on-premises AD, you will most likely have already a Azure AD Connect set up and running. And as part of that synchronization which is happening, your users, so your on-premises users and your domain information is already being synchronized to Azure AD. And what that means is that your Azure AD joined machine is aware of your domain information. And in this case, if a user signs in to a Azure AD Join device, your Azure AD is going to send the details of the user's on-premises domain back to the device, along with your, your primary refresh token. So in this case, your user on that Azure AD Join device knows how to connect to those resources. And in this case, the LSA service enables the Kerberos and end-to-end authentication to those devices. So let me show you how this works. Over here, I got a AVD session host. It's based on Windows 11. Oh, it's Windows 11. It's the Windows 11 Enterprise Multi-Session operating system, and it's so this is that command what I spoke earlier about. This device is only Azure AD joined. It's not domain joined, it's not hybrid joined, it's only connected to the Azure AD. In this case, and of course I already tested this because live demos isn't sure that it's always working correctly. So in this case I got a domain controller in Azure, and in this case it's also my file server just for the purpose of this demo. And what I'm going to do is navigate to that file share from my Azure AD joined device. And it's working. I didn't have to provide any information, no user login, no authentication. This machine isn't domain joined, but still can use the resources on-prem to, in this case, my file share. Pretty cool, right?
Really cool. Really cool.
Let me quickly go back to the slides. And now I think that comes the fun part, or at least it was the most hard part for us to get it all working. So the last couple of days, Sander and I spent a lot of time in trying to get this new public preview of FS Logic and Azure AD Join working. And the reason for that it's so excited that you can use it is because if you want to move away from your hybrid, or if you want to move away from your native AD join, I want to leverage the Azure AD join for your AVD session host. But there are, in most of the scenarios, you also want to leverage the FS Logic profile solution. There was another preview in the past, and that was that you can enable the Kerberos authentication for Azure Files. So if in the hybrid scenario, you could use that one, so you can still store your profiles on Azure Files. You will create I think it was a computer object in your local Active Directory, which like represents your Azure files in Azure, and that way it could communicate and authenticate with it, so you can use Azure Files as a storage solution for your FS Logics. For this new thing, it's something different. Sander is going to show you well what it is and how does it work, and of course how we finally managed to create a script to set it all up without providing all that information manually. So go ahead, Sander.
Yes, that was also, yes, that was the hardest part, because Microsoft has written a document about how to create this situation, and I must say it's not that very hard, but there are some things I was thinking about. The login, for example. When you're creating automation, you won't be login every time. Especially not when it's requesting a screen to provide username and password. So we spent a lot of time to create a script which helps us deploying this whole new functionality without any touch. So and basically for now it's I have to log in to Azure, of course. Yes, you have to log in sometimes. So that's what we need to do. And from that context, I'm hopping to all different environments, to Graph, to Azure AD, to Microsoft Endpoint Manager, to Windows.net APIs, that ways. And now we have managed to configure the whole FSLogix environment with just one single login. So that's pretty cool. Before I show up what is going on, first it's good to know, yes, it's still in public preview, so you can use it, but it's not general yet. So SLAs, that kind of things are still a question about of how they're doing it. First of all, a little quick review about what you need to get it working. We need a Windows 10 or 11 single multi-session. Well, that's not the biggest part. Yes, you still need users to synchronize users from an Active Directory, so you can't throw your Active Directory away yet. And also, when I have to assign permissions to the share, I will show what all the components what we need. So, and there's also we're creating a file share, and on that file share we need permissions, of course. That's based on an Azure role, but in that Azure role you have to provide a user or group which is also from the Active Directory. Well, what's the main plus on creating FSLogix in combination with Azure AD? You don't need a direct line of sight of your domain control, and that's exactly what happens because an Azure AD joint machine can be everywhere. So it can be at every place in the world. You don't need any VPN connection, other networks solutions to see your Active Directory, to get a user account, to get a ticket, to log into the share on Azure. So that's pretty cool. And how did Microsoft manage that? Well, I think it's the best way to show is to click through the portal. So I'm trying to share my screen again.
And it's still so the thing with it, and I saw some tweets on Twitter and some communication. So if you want, and I just want to make sure that everybody understands it, if you want to use this functionality, so you want to use FSLogix in an Azure AD join scenario, you still, and I repeat, you still have to use a synchronized user from the Active Directory. So
Yep,
you still
that's
need
correct.
to set up a Active Directory, synchronize those users to the cloud, and then you can use on an Azure AD joint device FSLogix. Well, let's hope they fix it
Yeah.
quickly, that we don't need a Active Directory anymore. Let me try to show your screen.
Yeah.
Yep, there it is.
Okay, cool. At first, I created a storage account, because a profile solution which have to be somewhere. So I've created a storage account. And I've created file shares. That's already the first point of get good word for that. Attention for that. Because the storage account needs to accept Kerberos tickets. So you have to configure the Kerberos authentication method, and you can't mix up different types of authentication. So if I use Kerberos in this particular situation, then everything in those storage accounts is accepting Kerberos. So that's all. The main thing. What I did is I created one for profile shares and one for the office settings and one for the office settings. And that's it. The storage account. When looking to the access control, as I said, you have to assign some role assignments for that. Users permission to those file shares, and that's this one. Storage file data, storage file data, contributor. You have three different roles which you can assign. I choose this one, and I to the AVD users. So that's quite simple for a storage account. And then it comes to the most tricky part. Because what actually happens is that some resources in Azure are able to create a system identity in Azure. Users, groups, devices. Function apps. That kind of resources can be a system identity in Azure. Storage account. So what we do is we create app registration, which is representing this storage account. So what I did, I created a storage or an application. It has to be the same name. It has to be the same storage account. So that's the match where. That's the way Microsoft matches storage account to the storage application. It needs some AP permission. So what I'm doing at the end is I'm connecting with my account to this application. This application sees Sander from the domain. And he is able to use this application to log on to the storage account. And that's the AP permission. So it has to read my profile, my user settings. So my user settings knows who I am, what I'm doing over here. I'm also exposing a This is the part where the application shows up on the internet. So what I do in my session host, I will show it in a few minutes. What I'm doing in my session is configuring the location of storage, and that's Logix 9070 file.core. That's exactly the same configuration as what is configured on the session. So I'm looking for that URL. This application is say hello, I'm over here. This is the URL. I'm logging in for you to that URL, and that's the way how connects to the storage account. I also need to create a service principal because that's the inside part of the Azure AD, the system, the enterprise application. So the service principal allows me to connect the storage account resource. Well, that's really in a nutshell. Microsoft has written a really good document about every step explained and what's going on. I will show you. I will show you on the session host what is configured. Well, I have already searched the registry key for this. What I'm doing is the only thing I do is telling which is already installed on Windows 11, so you don't need to have to install it again. Only thing I need to do is creating a registry key, which tells me where find profile. My profile. Well, I say it's the VRD location is on this URL. So what actually happens is it's searching for that URL, the application, say hello, I'm over here. That application is logging into the service principal and to log into the storage account. So that's the only thing I need to do on my session host. I've created a script for that to deploy those registry keys. I've created a script deploy avid logic config. This is the PowerShell. This is the PowerShell running on the virtual machine on setting all those keys. It's accepting the locations which I need to configure. And well, it also has to configure some parameters in the registry key to tell using Kerberos to log into storage account. So I also added that to my script. This whole script is deployed to the Azure to the session host Azure virtual machine. I'm pushing it as a custom script extension. So I'm also able to grab a script from somewhere on the internet and use it as a configuration script. And also use a local scenario where putting a script into it. Well, that's really in a nutshell. But it's very cool. There are some public preview things which also need some attention because you have to tell the storage account it is accepting Kerberos. Normally when you go to a storage account, going back to that, you can access them by providing access keys. Well, by default, it has two keys. But as you can see, I can't create any Kerberos key or something. And that's of a public preview symptom because not supported from the portal. So when you have to create Kerberos keys, you definitely need PowerShell for that. I also have created. I will also show it within PowerShell. I'm grabbing a storage account. There is a new key. Calling list Kerberos key. So when I'm requesting this key for the storage account, 9070 in this case, getting some keys. And there's also the Kerberos key. So I have to create this key in PowerShell. This is also the key which I need to configure into a service principal. Because the service principal I've created is using this key to authenticate to the storage account, and those keys must exactly match. We had some situations where these keys aren't matching when trying to create a local share to the storage account. It's asking for a new password. So at the end it was the Kerberos key which was configured correctly. So
is it more of a impersonation thing? So a user logs into Azure AD, you will configure like the Cloud Kerberos ticket retrieval, and I think that's something we can show them in a sec with the klist command, that we will have a Kerberos ticket from Microsoft Online. But if you do that, will it impersonate to that app registration?
Yeah, it's using the app registration. It's using your account. It's using your account as impersonation to what actually it is. It's like domino. You log in domino. You log in application with your user account. You are able to do that because you have configured it, because it's reading your profile and you have permissions to use that application, and that application is ticking the next domino to that service principal. So yeah, and in fact you are using that service principal. The user principal says, "Oh, I have to log into the storage account with this password," and that's the password which you have to configure with the curb key within PowerShell, and then you're hopping to the storage account. Well, and I think we don't go further into the technique, because you can spend a whole session about this part only. So we're also writing a blog about it, how to configure, where you have to look at, what commands you need. So it's almost done, and then you will find it on my website.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Well, that's also the next slide with the public preview symptoms. You have to, if you want to create a key, use PowerShell, and then you are able to set it to the service principal.
Yeah, that's because the first part, create the storage account, Kerberos key, you cannot do that in the Azure portal yet. So you have to use PowerShell. And the second part is, well, you have to make sure that those keys are being the same, and you have to make sure that you enable the authentication option.
Yeah, the authentication option for Kerberos, you also need PowerShell. It's also explained in the documentation. That's not a part you can do in the portal, so that's also the PowerShell part.
And if you run into any trouble well, I'm not sure what kind of error we had. It was like, cannot log in, please provide another login. You cannot.
It's asking for a password again, because if the password doesn't match between the service principal and the Kerberos key on the storage account, then you can message it like that.
Yeah. And it took us quite some time to figure it out that was the case.
Yeah.
And probably if we just, like, it's always RTFM, if you just read the documentation and follow it step by step, you will get there. But if you try, like us, to halfway there automate it, then sometimes you will run into some kind of weird and strange issues with those kind of solutions. So, well, I think, Sander, I'm not sure about you, but I think we can skip the next slide also, because we are way over our planned time. So, well, it's not the first time we are not that good in things like time management, especially with things like this, because it's just way too fun to work about stuff like this. What I wanted to say about this last thing is, I hope Microsoft is also focusing on like removing the Active Directory part of it, so we can use FS Logic with an Azure AD Join device without synchronized or a local Active Directory. So maybe that's something we will see in when this solution comes into GA.
Yeah, because well, I have some scenarios in the past where in scenarios where you need 50 or 100 people using a a temporary desktop for adoption tests or for school or a training or something. You don't need any Active Directory, just a full desktop with some software in it. Then this could be a really good scenario for that.
Yeah.
But then you don't have to configure AD for school students, or you can just invite them on your Active Directory, put them in a group, and then provide the storage solution as we discussed. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so let me quickly change our slide. So don't be scared, you will see us again. There we are. I'm seriously quite impressed by how this all looks in OBS. We didn't have any experience with it. What I just wanted to say, because we didn't mention it at the beginning of our presentation, is if you want to see other sessions, which you have to do because there are a lot of interesting sessions. You can go to the festivetechcalendar.com and also make sure that they are raising money for Girls Who Code. You can see the link on their website.
Website. Yeah.
So make sure that you will visit that and try to donate a amount of money, a small or a big one, it doesn't matter.
Every single step helps. So
Yeah, definitely. And I would just wanted to thank all the organizers for this great event. I know for our presentation, I think originally we had him I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago, but due to some private and personal stuff, we didn't have enough time to fix this. Like you understand, all these things and sessions we do in our own private time. So sometimes, especially when you got a newborn, it can be quite challenging to find the right time.
well, it's the greatest time investment you can do.
And well, I hope everybody enjoyed this session. I did at least. I know the like the hybrid and Azure AD part isn't that quite interesting, but I hope the part about the automation about Azure Files Kerberos authentication was more interesting for the most of you. Well, yeah, that's it. I hope I
Well,
wish you a very good day.
I hope you have great holidays, and hope to see you soon in live and in person
Yep,
somewhere
yep.
when COVID is over. Or
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope so.
yeah, yeah.
Cool, cool.
All right.
Okay, thanks
Thanks,
everybody.
guys. Bye bye.
Bye bye.